Hello, welcome to today's edition of Pegasus Test. On today's edition, we're going to talk about the International Transport of Firearms, Part 2. Now last year when I went to Finnish Brutality, I sent my firearms as cargo, and for this year's Finnish Brutality in 2020 I did the exact same thing. The difference was back in March 9th to be specific, jurisdiction went from the U.S. State Department over to the U.S. Commerce Department, and that required doing it a little bit differently. So I figured I'd do another video and put the most current information out there as I know it to be. So it started out as a problem because COVID is you have to have someone willing to work with you on your behalf in Finland, which I was able to arrange. That person went to the Finnish police for me with a power of attorney from me to apply on my behalf for a temporary import permit for the purposes of the match. And one of the things the police wanted was the embassy to stamp off on my documentation as being true and genuine, which I had to do in 2019. Unfortunately, due to COVID and the situation that it created with everybody being on lockdown, a lot of embassies being closed, including the Finnish embassy, I couldn't get that done. But working with the Finnish embassy through email and the Finnish police, we were able to find a workaround solution. That being said, got that import permit. Then I applied for an export permit from the U.S. Commerce Department. I used that export permit combined with the Finnish import permit to ship my goods as cargo. I also obtained another document I talked about in a previous video called a carnet. Carnets, if you don't know what they are basically passports for freight. What allows when you send a shipment from a country that uses carnets to a country that accepts carnets, in this case the United States to Finland, the Finnish customs will look at the carnet and realize, okay, you brought this in. They inspect the cargo to make sure, yes, the cargo matches what the carnet says it is, and based on that information, they let the goods into the country duty-free. So I arranged to have them sent over as cargo. When I then arrived in Finland, I went ahead and picked up the my rifles, and then went to the match, shot the match. When I was done, turned the rifles back over to my freight agent in Finland and had them sent back to the United States, where at that point the copy of the export license and the carnet were presented to show that these were in fact United States goods returning to the United States, and then customs released them and I picked them up and went on my merry way with my weapons. All sounds pretty simple, correct? Well, not so much. Government bureaucracy is involved. If you're going to use this method of sending your firearms overseas to go to a match, be aware of a couple things. One, it's not cheap. It's not an inexpensive method. Now that the State Department's not involved, it's significantly less costly than it was before, but it's still a costly measure of doing it. So there is an alternative method to this long, drawn-out process I've described for taking your firearms to a foreign country. Now the way that I just described was the method of doing it by cargo. Now, you can take your firearms with you. Now this process has a set of complications to it as well. Like the cargo process, you have to have someone in Finland who's willing to act on your behalf to go to the police and get the import permit for you. And I'm using Finland as an example because that's what I've just recently done. I know if you go to South Africa for a hunt or you go down to New Zealand for a hunt down there, it's a little bit different. But the general process is the same. So, in the case of Finland, as I said, you have somebody in Finland on your behalf with a power of attorney, go to the police and get an import permit for you. Here in the United States, you go to Customs and get Form 4457 signed off by a Customs officer. What you have to do is take your firearms with you, go to the Customs officer, he'll look it over, he'll verify serial numbers, and then sign off on the form and saying, yes, I've inspected these things, these were in possession of Mr. Smith or whoever, and that, you know, he's taking these out of the country, and generally that form's good for 1 year. Then you check your firearms in as baggage on your flight. You go to your country destination, as an example in this case Finland, and you'll pick up your firearms off the conveyor belt with your luggage, and then you'll go through the line that says you have something to declare, and you'll have a long talk with the border guards, and then you go on your merry way. Alright, so the next logical question we have is, why did I choose to send it as cargo versus taking it as my checked baggage? Incredibly valid question. And the reasons are multiple. First of which being, I work in the logistics industry. That's my day job. It's what I do. I literally ship firearms every day internationally. So I know the process fairly well. So I was able to take advantage of that knowledge, and being in the industry, obviously there's some insider savings that I can take advantage of. The second reason was convenience. This allowed me, especially in the time of COVID, maximum flexibility in my travel plans. By sending them over as cargo, I actually got into country 2.5 days before the match started, and I didn't bother to pick up my firearms from my freight agent until literally the day before the match. So I had 2 days where I could do whatever I wanted and not worry about the security of my firearms in a foreign land as an American. You know, rifle cases are distinctive. You can say all you want, do all you want, but a hard rifle case is very distinctive. Everybody knows what it is when they see it. The next subset of that was on the back side of the match. Monday morning, you know, the match was over Sunday evening. Monday morning, I went to my freight agent, went, here's my stuff, sent it back to the USA for me. And then I went and had a great time in Finland, enjoying the local countryside. Went and saw the Finnish Armor Museum, which if you haven't seen, and you go to Finland, you need to check it out. It's really cool. And then, you know, day after that, flew out. And I didn't have to worry about my firearms or security thereof. The third reason was, or third subset of that reason was COVID. COVID itself. It played havoc with flights. I was originally supposed to go to Finland on Iceland Air. Well, they canceled service. Couldn't go. The next thing, I switched over to Lufthansa, which they kept adjusting the dates of when I would arrive and depart Finland, and even finally, just before I got ready to go, they switched my ticket over to United Airlines through their code sharing program. And had I decided to take my firearms as baggage, I would have been in a real pickle. Because to comply with traveling with firearms as baggage, you got to comply with every country you land in. By the time I originally started planning to go, I was going to go cargo anyways, but as a backup plan, I did investigate taking his baggage, and Iceland Air really didn't have a problem. Their policy is not clear, but with several talks with them and understanding where I was going, that we pretty much felt that, yeah, I could get through Iceland, transit over to Finland without any issue. When I had to switch my ticket over to Lufthansa, that's a problem, because the type of weapons that you would use at a brutality-style match by German law are considered weapons of war and fall under something called the KWKG, which is a word about this long in German that I can't pronounce. But special permits are required, and they take months to get, and I didn't have months. So had I planned to move my guns that way, I would have been either A, scrambling to switch them over to cargo in a compressed time frame, or B, had to work with somebody in Finland to arrange to borrow some somehow. So cargo over taking them as baggage had a lot of advantages. That leads into the next reason why I chose not to take his baggage, was how you fly. You can't just get on any flight. First, you have the airline rules, whether your airline will take the type of firearms that you are taking. For example, Air France does not mind hunting firearms. They got a big problem with military-style looking firearms. So that's a carrier selection. Another thing is the airline you select may have no problem with firearms whatsoever, but it's where they transit on the way to your destination. For example, I have no authority on every flight that goes through the sky, but under normal non-COVID conditions, there's one non-stop flight from the United States to Helsinki. It's Flight 6 on Finnair out of JFK to Helsinki. If you get any other flight, it will transit a European hub, and depending on that hub is what happens. If you go through the UK, London Heathrow, with firearms in your baggage, even though your compliance with the airlines, your compliance with your origin country, your compliance with your destination country, yeah, they don't care. You're not leaving with your firearms. And that's even if they decide that, hey, you did everything correctly. You're not leaving with your firearms. The stories out there in the hunting community are legendary. The other thing is, the Germans, as I mentioned earlier, have very strict rules. They'll let you do it. They want you to have their permit. And it's their country. They have every right to demand to do that. And other countries have other variances. So while it is less expensive to travel with your firearms as baggage, the cargo advantage that I felt was a safer option to ensure that my guns would get to Finland in the time I needed them to be there and come back to the United States without trouble. And, you know, it was very nice because they were there waiting for me. And when I went through in my traveling, I'm just a traveler. I'm on business. I'm doing my thing, and no firearms talk. I didn't have to declare anything to any customs official in any country. And that made traveling a whole lot easier. Another thing that affects when you travel with the firearms as your baggage is you're going to get hit with extra baggage fees depending on the airline. Because you'll have your baggage with all your clothes and everything, and you will have this second piece. That's your firearms. Maybe it's your third piece, I don't know. But whatever it is, it's more than one. And check with the airline you go with, you'll find your second bag fee, it can be significantly expensive. When I was researching it, one airline was $50, which, so what? But another airline I looked at, the extra bag fee was $200. That's a pretty big increase for a rifle case. So be aware of that as a cost, that if you take your firearms with you as checked baggage. And I'm going to leave you on this note. The best way to travel internationally with your firearms, with your cargo or as checked baggage, is to remember the 7 Ps, which is proper prior planning prevents piss poor performance. Yes, you've got to plan this out. You can't do it on a whim. If you think you're going to go to a match, start your research early. Even if you don't know when the match in 2021 is going to be, or the hunt that you're going to go on in 2021 is even going to happen, if you think it's going to happen and you've hit the 6-month mark, start doing your research. Even if you're not sure you're going to get into the match, do your research. So when you get in, you already got that farther ahead of the curve. Same with your hunt, you know, be ahead of the curve, because once you get behind, it's hard to catch up. You're playing into a commodity that is heavily regulated in every nation on earth. Yes, the United States is one of the most liberal countries with firearms, but it's still a very heavily regulated item the moment you start crossing international borders. U.S. law kicks in, the law of the carrier you're flying on kicks in, the laws of the countries you're transiting kick in, and yes, the destination country has its laws too. And you've got to comply with everything. We hope you found this edition of Pegasus Test helpful and informative. Please comment, like, and subscribe, and tune in for future videos on firearms transportation.